Hi, I'm John Child and welcome to Drawing Talks, a channel dedicated to inspire people to draw and learn something about the subject being drawn. After all, if something's worth drawing, then it must have an interesting story. And in my opinion, there's no better subject than my favourite, history. Yes, I know, I can imagine you rolling your eyes now because for many people it's a boring subject, but I assure you it's not. It just depends how it's served up. And by using drawing, we can make history come to life. So presenting over 200 hours of tea drinking hunched over a piece of A2 paper, I give you my art piece with its long thought out title, History. Now all artists have a different method, so I'll take you through my process on this piece. Stage 1. Pencil on A2 paper, not to mention unspeakable amounts of erasers. Stage 2. Outlined and cross-hatched with black ink, sometimes with a Sharpie, just a cheap Sharpie bought down the road. Stage 3. Scanned to make it into a digital format. And the last stage, 4. Colouring in on a computer program called Adobe Photoshop. If you'd like to see videos of this being drawn, I've added time-lapse videos of a handful of scenes on this channel, so please check that out. We start with the Moon, which is the longest serving historian to have witnessed human history from its very beginning, and itself became a major part of that history as humans strived to reach for the stars. A good example of this was the Russian-made first section of the International Space Station called Zarya. This was symbolic of a truly peaceful international venture to build the largest habitable structure around Earth's orbit. What's poetic is that the solar panels make it look like it has wings and echoes humans' attempts of powered flight, which took the form of a plane called the Kitty Hawk, seen here. The Kitty Hawk was built by the Wright brothers, American engineers that usually made bicycles. What I find truly amazing is it flew 68 years before man was sent into space. But sadly, one of the brothers, Orville Wright, was only still around to see an evolved version of his invention in the form of a bomber was used to drop the first nuclear bombs on Japan in World War II. But at least the Wright brothers got to see their invention take off, as Michelangelo, the guy that painted the ceiling in the Sistine Chapel, never got to see the concept of the helicopter fly. This only came about 900 years later. For that matter, he also missed out on the parachute and the tank, which he also came up with. Although it took modern times to make such concepts happen, we can't ignore the marvel of ancient engineering. The Easter Island statues, the Mayan pyramids, and the Greek Acropolis. All to today's standards are huge feats of engineering that didn't use any powered machinery to build. Sadly, creation also is accompanied by destruction, sometimes caused by humans, such as the 9/11 Twin Towers attack, and sometimes caused by nature, like the volcanic eruption of Mount Vesuvius that buried an entire Italian town of Pompeii in hot ash. However, there are many incredible structures that escape those perils, such as the Egyptian pyramids and Stonehenge, both built thousands of years ago, and so far, fingers crossed, are still standing today. The Tower of London and the Colosseum, although separated by time and distance, they both house wild animals for sport. But I think it's the Tower of London that housed the most unique animal, a polar bear. This was gifted to King Henry III by the King of Norway, where it was put on a lead and led to nearby River Thames to eat the fish. Suffice to say, it didn't live long as the river was highly polluted back then. The Chinese and the Berlin Walls are iconic in their size as well as their history. The Chinese Wall was designed to keep invaders out, and the Berlin Wall was designed to keep its people in. And by that I mean those in the communist East Berlin, which was controlled by the Soviet Union, were stopped from escaping to the capitalist West Berlin, controlled by the British, the Americans and French. This depiction is on the west side of the wall, which was covered in graffiti, some of which were incredible works of art, such as this depiction from a famous photograph of two government ministers from East Germany and the Soviet Union kissing. Yes, this actually did happen during a trade agreement. Google it. Although Germany had a turbulent history, it also contributed greatly to human advances. Gutenberg was a German blacksmith that invented the printing press, seen here. This invention catapulted humanity to be literate and have the ability to spread ideas quickly and accurately around the world. Religion has a lot to owe to the printing press, as these little-known religions, Judaism, Christianity and Islam, spread across the globe and are symbolised here by Jesus and Muhammad looking in amazement at the Bible and Quran being printed. However, history books always need updating, as only until recently it was discovered that the first printing press was actually invented by monks 600 years earlier in Korea. Another example of history having to be rewritten is that of the Italian man called Galileo. You may have heard of him. He was the first to point a telescope to the moon and map its surface 300 years before humans set foot on it. But it turns out it was in fact an Englishman called Thomas Harriot who beat him to it several months earlier. And why was he not credited for this? Well, he didn't want to draw attention to himself, as he knew a few mates locked up in the Tower of London for political crimes. But either way, he didn't lose out on fame, as he's credited for bringing the potato to Britain and learnt smoking from the Indians during the first voyages to the Americas. Humanity's best qualities of exploration and technological advancement is sadly overshadowed by its dark behaviour. Auschwitz concentration camp and the Cambodian killing fields were both locations for mass murder. The concentration camps are well known for killing 6 million Jews, but what is often looked over, there were a further 7 million people killed for being disabled, homosexual, political prisoners, and anyone else the Nazi Party thought threatened their plans. The Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, on the other hand, were threatened by academics and anyone else they considered smart. Even wearing glasses meant it was an indication that you were educated and therefore put to death. In front of the two sites is Edvard Munch, a Norwegian artist that painted the world famous The Scream, which was inspired by his battle with loneliness as a scream of nature. But for me personally, it really sums up the shock and horror of what humanity is capable of doing to itself. But humanity's ability to kill is greatly outweighed by its ability to make life and discover how it's made, DNA. Now, there were many scientists involved trying to discover the building blocks of life, but it was physicists James Watson and Francis Crick that found it existed. But I loved this being about discovery made in Britain because there was a pub involved. After making the discovery, the two scientists ran down a road to the nearest pub called the Eagle in Cambridge and shouted out, "We have found the secret of life!" And it was only 34 years later that the discovery enabled scientists to make huge advances in medicine. But comically, it is the birth of the first clone, Dolly the sheep, that everyone knows more about as a result of DNA. As an Englishman, I love a good pub, and the Eagle is no stranger to history, as it was a hangout for RAF pilots during World War II, and they signed their names on the ceiling, which is still there today, so I do recommend you stop by for a pint or two. On the theme of war, meet the greatest military strategist, Sun Tzu from China, and the greatest general, Alexander the Great from Macedonia. Sun Tzu is showing Alex his world-famous book called The Art of War. Both men proved that as barbaric warriors to win one takes a highly civilized approach. As a side note, ironically, most military institutions around the world outlaw homosexuals from joining their ranks and even punish them, but Alexander was known to have an intimate male companion during his campaigns. War isn't the only way that the world can change. A peaceful protest by Rosa Parks, who refused to give up a white-only bus seat, which sparked off the American Civil Rights Movement. And Emmeline Pankhurst, that organised and rallied women to protest their right to vote in Britain. Although these were peaceful, these were examples of bravery that went on to implement change enjoyed by everyone today. Shakespeare and Tesla, two majestic figures that truly enrich humanity to monumental levels and prove that once every so often we can evolve. Tesla gave us a brave new world, energy, electrical light and X-rays, while Shakespeare gave me the ability to articulate this information with words and sayings that were invented by him. Thanks, Shakespeare. Eureka! Einstein helping Archimedes out the bath. The legend says Archimedes made the discovery of being able to find the volume of any object by water displacement. Some historians today say that the death of Archimedes by a Roman soldier and the loss of his notes took humanity 1,000 years to rediscover. Imagine where we'd be now if he didn't die. Thankfully, Einstein lived long enough to discover the theory of relativity. This formula allowed humans to make huge amounts of energy in the form of nuclear power. Three figureheads that stood against the world's largest empire. The former lawyer Gandhi explaining to African General Cetshwayo and American General George Washington that the same enemy, the British Empire, could be overcome by peaceful means and thereby avoid huge loss of life. Gandhi's approach was to use passive resistance, which meant that the British could no longer continue to occupy India as it was seen by the world as a cruel occupying force and cost too much to police. But sometimes peaceful resistance could not work against an enemy that didn't care what the world thought. Here are a group of men that had a huge impact on how we live our lives today. Leaders from World War II play out world domination over the board game Risk. Former World War I fighter ace and Nazi leader Göring reenacts his plan for the Battle of Britain, with the German Me-109 shooting down an RAF Spitfire. Japanese General Tojo flicks American President Roosevelt's ships out of Pearl Harbor. Germany's Hitler is furious that the British Prime Minister Churchill doesn't surrender, while Italian dictator Mussolini joins in late on the side of the Nazis. And dictator Stalin, preoccupied, assumes non-aggression agreements with Hitler will be honoured and looks on to his detriment. Stalin is often overlooked in history when talking about crimes against humanity, to the point that he even won America's respected Time magazine's Man of the Year. Here he is looking at a few examples of the 5 million famine victims that died under his drive of modernisation of the country through a series of 5-year plans. Collectivised farming was established so farmers were forced to feed cities while those out in the countryside starved to death. So what was the result? The Soviet Union went on from being a pre-industrial poor nation of farmers using horse and carts to becoming a world superpower and being the first to launch man into space in just a few decades. Out from the misery of war, there's many more stories of humanity at its finest. During the Crimean War, where Britain fought against Russia, the British government turned down a Jamaican woman called Mary Seacole who desperately wanted to do her bit and offer medical assistance to the troops. But she, with her tenacity and character, made her own way all the way to the front line and saved more British soldiers than Florence Nightingale. Mostly forgotten, she has only been recently retaught in British schools and a statue erected near the same parliament that rejected her, and for me personally is perhaps my most favourite historical figure. Where Mary cemented her place in history through a lifetime of good deeds, leaders such as China's Empress Wu Zetian, Rome's first emperor Augustus, and Egypt's Cleopatra are here looking amazed at John Logie Baird's invention, the television, shown here playing the History Channel. Many ancient leaders would immortalise their deeds in stone and marble. However, it was in fact light that spread their memory beyond to a world they never even knew existed. And that new world was eventually dominated by the British Empire. Queen Elizabeth I, the mother of the British Empire, is impressed at the father of the Industrial Revolution, Isambard Kingdom Brunel, whom later strengthened it with steam and iron. Throughout Lizzie's reign there was much war, of which France was one enemy, and the irony? Brunel was the son of a French engineer. With all empires, it was the army that helped establish and police it, and arguably by the best soldiers in history, as Spartan and Roman. The simple doctrine of discipline and working together proved that any challenge can be overcome. There were many other armies throughout history that were never given the same credit for their professionalism in helping other nations. Over 70,000 Indian soldiers died in World War I in the defence of France. This Sikh soldiers fighting for the British, but I find history amazing that it was only 100 years earlier that the French Napoleonic soldiers were attacking the same nation that would later defend their land in both world wars. But sometimes fighting isn't about defending against enemies, but a way of life to become disciplined. Muhammad Ali and Bruce Lee had a powerful impact on popular culture as they did on fighting opponents. Muhammad Ali, in contrast, chose not to fight in the Vietnam War, and Bruce Lee fought against old Chinese doctrines of not being able to teach outsiders martial arts. So much so that even the famous actor Steve McQueen was one of his students. Polish scientist Marie Curie, discoverer of the material required to make nuclear energy, sits upon a Soviet tractor from the same country that would later use that discovery to become a nuclear superpower. Sadly, she used the same radioactive glow as a nightlight, which later killed her. The quest for power has always driven humans, which in turn sped up its progression. Even though it could only do 28 miles per hour, the first steam train was called the rocket. But this invention enabled people to cross vast distances faster than ever before. Strangely, an unforeseen problem revealed itself that had a massive impact on telling the time, as there was never any need to keep a clock accurate from one city to another, as it took days to travel, not hours or minutes, and so London would have a different time compared to Bristol. As you can see, it's poetic that the rocket is pulling out from the smoke of another much different rocket, the Saturn V, that would also see humankind take another huge step into the future and make more history. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Drawing Talks and learnt something new. If you would like to leave comments, or better yet, subscribe, hit the button below. You'll be sure not to miss out on any new videos. You take care. Happy drawing and happy learning.